I never thought my career as a heating and cooling specialist would end with me watching the most vindictive HOA board in Colorado Springs freeze their own community center. But here we are. My name is Vincent Ortega, and I have been running a small HVAC business in Colorado for the past 15 years. The work keeps me busy during the brutal winter months, and I have built a solid reputation for being reliable, honest, and quick to respond in emergencies. My specialty has always been propane heating systems, which are essential in the rural parts of Colorado where natural gas lines do not reach. I live in a neighborhood called Ponderosa Ridge, a development of about 200 homes nestled in the foothills just outside Colorado Springs. When I moved here 8 years ago, the place seemed perfect. The homes were reasonably priced, the views were stunning, and the community seemed friendly enough. That was before I truly understood what the Homeowners Association was capable of. The trouble started in early November, right as the temperatures began their annual plunge toward the negatives. I received a certified letter in my mailbox, which is never a good sign. The envelope bore the return address of the Ponderosa Ridge HOA, and my stomach sank before I even opened it. Inside was a 2-page document printed on official letterhead, written in that particular brand of passive-aggressive legalese that HOAs seem to specialize in. The letter was signed by Patricia Hendricks, the HOA president, a woman in her mid-50s who treated the neighborhood like her personal fiefdom. The letter informed me that effective immediately, the storage of propane tanks on residential properties was strictly prohibited due to safety concerns. Any homeowner found in violation would face daily fines of $200 until the violation was corrected. I had to read it 3 times to make sure I was understanding correctly. The letter cited vague fire hazards and potential explosion risks, but provided no actual evidence or incident reports to justify this sudden policy change. I had 3 propane tanks on my property. 2 were for my own home heating system, which I had specifically installed when I moved in, because my house was one of the few in the development that did not have access to the natural gas line due to a zoning quirk. The 3rd tank was essentially a mobile unit I kept for emergency service calls. I immediately called the HOA office, a small building near the community center that Patricia ran like a military command post. The phone rang 4 times before she picked up. Ponderosa Ridge HOA, Patricia speaking. Patricia, this is Vincent Ortega over on Juniper Lane. I just got this letter about propane tanks, and I need to discuss this with you. My entire heating system runs on propane. I do not have natural gas access. There was a pause on the other end, and I could practically hear her satisfaction through the phone. Mr. Ortega, the policy applies to everyone in the community. We have received numerous complaints about the safety risks associated with propane storage. The board voted unanimously to implement this ban. Complaints from who? I have had these tanks for 8 years without a single issue. And what am I supposed to do about heating my house? It is going to be negative temperatures in a few weeks. That is not the HOA's concern, Patricia said, her voice crisp and final. You will need to make alternative arrangements. Perhaps you can have your propane tanks relocated off the property, or you might consider converting to electric heating. The policy is effective immediately, and fines will begin accruing if you are not in compliance by the end of this week. This is insane. You cannot just expect people to change their entire heating systems with a few days' notice in the middle of winter. Mr. Ortega, I suggest you review your HOA agreement. The board has the authority to implement safety measures as we see fit. Have a good day. She hung up before I could respond. I stood in my kitchen, staring at the phone, feeling a familiar anger building in my chest. This was not the first time Patricia had flexed her authority in absurd ways, but this was by far the most dangerous and unreasonable policy I had encountered. Over the past few years, she had banned certain paint colors, mandated specific landscaping requirements, and even tried to regulate what type of holiday decorations people could display. But banning propane when people depended on it for heat was crossing a line into genuine harm. I spent the rest of the day calling other HOA board members, trying to find someone reasonable who might reverse this decision. The board consisted of 5 people: Patricia, her best friend Margaret Sullivan, a retired accountant named Doug Wheeler, a younger woman named Jennifer Hayes who mostly stayed quiet, and an older gentleman named Robert Chen who seemed perpetually confused about what was happening. I managed to reach Doug and Robert, but both gave me the same story. Patricia had called an emergency board meeting, presented her case about propane safety, and pushed the vote through. Doug admitted he had reservations but went along with it because Patricia had been insistent. Robert seemed to barely remember the meeting at all. That evening, I drove over to my neighbor Mike's house. Mike Davidson was a truck driver who also heated his home with propane, and I knew he would be affected by this policy too. When I showed him the letter, his face went red. "Are you kidding me? I just filled my tanks last week. Cost me almost $1,000. What does she expect me to do, just dump propane out and switch to electric in 3 days?" "I do not think she cares," I said. "This is about control." Patricia has been looking for ways to assert authority, and this time she found something that affects people directly. We need to fight this. Can we call a community meeting or something? The HOA rules say we need signatures from at least 30% of homeowners to call for a vote to overturn a board decision. That is about 60 households. We could try to get signatures, but it will take time, and the fines start accruing this Friday. Mike shook his head in frustration. This is why I hate HOAs. They always find a way to make your life miserable. Over the next 2 days, I went door to door collecting signatures for a petition to overturn the propane ban. It was harder than I expected. Many homeowners used natural gas or electric heating and did not care about the propane issue. Others were afraid to go against Patricia, who had a reputation for retaliating against people who opposed her. I managed to get 43 signatures, which was not enough to force a vote, but I submitted the petition anyway, hoping it might pressure the board to reconsider. Patricia responded with another letter, this time addressed to me personally. She thanked me for my concern, but stated that the board stood by its decision. She also reminded me that my propane tanks were still in violation and that fines would begin immediately. By Friday afternoon, I was officially being charged $200 per day. I considered my options carefully. I could remove the propane tanks, but that would leave me without heat. I could try to convert to electric heating, but that would cost tens of thousands of dollars and take weeks to install, assuming I could even find a contractor available during the busiest season. I could try to take legal action against the HOA, but that would be expensive and time-consuming, and there was no guarantee I would win. Or I could simply refuse to comply and let the fines accumulate while I figured out a longer-term solution. I chose to refuse compliance, at least temporarily. I was not going to freeze in my own home because Patricia Hendricks was on a power trip, but I did take one precaution. I moved my mobile propane tank, the one I used for service calls, to a storage unit I rented across town. That way, at least my work would not be affected. The first week of fines totaled $1,400. Patricia sent me a bill with a bright red stamp that said overdue in capital letters. I filed it away and did not pay. The second week brought another $1,400. By the end of November, I owed the HOA nearly $6,000 in fines, and Patricia was threatening to place a lien on my property. Then December arrived, and with it came the real cold. Colorado winters are no joke, but this one was shaping up to be particularly brutal. The National Weather Service issued warnings about an Arctic blast that would send temperatures plummeting to negative 15 degrees Fahrenheit, with wind chills making it feel closer to negative 30. The news urged people to stay indoors, check on elderly neighbors, and make sure their heating systems were functioning properly. That was when I received the phone call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was finishing up a repair job on the other side of Colorado Springs when my phone rang. The caller ID showed it was the Ponderosa Ridge Community Center. "Vincent Ortega," I answered. "Mr. Ortega, this is Jennifer Hayes from the HOA board. We have a bit of an emergency situation, and I was hoping you might be able to help." Jennifer was the quiet board member, the one who rarely spoke up during meetings. Her voice sounded nervous, almost apologetic. "What kind of emergency?" "Well, the heating system at the community center has stopped working. We have a senior citizen group meeting here this evening, and with the temperatures dropping, we need to get the heat back on as soon as possible. I know you do HVAC work, and I was wondering if you could come take a look." I almost laughed. The irony was too perfect. "Jennifer, I appreciate you reaching out, but I am a little confused. Does the community center not have a regular HVAC contractor?" "We do, but they cannot get anyone out here until Thursday at the earliest. Everyone is swamped with emergency calls because of the cold snap. You are local and you know these systems. I thought maybe you could help." "What type of heating system does the community center have?" There was a pause. "I think it is propane. We have tanks out back." Now I did laugh, though there was no humor in it. "So let me get this straight. The HOA banned propane storage on residential properties because of safety concerns, but the community center, which is owned and operated by the HOA, runs on propane. I know how it sounds, but this is different. The community center is a commercial building, not a residence. Jennifer, the safety concerns Patricia cited in her letters do not magically disappear because a building is zoned differently. Propane is propane. Either it is dangerous or it is not. Please, Mr. Ortega." We have about 30 seniors who meet here every Tuesday evening. Some of them are in their 80s. We cannot have them sitting in a freezing building. I thought about it for a moment. The decent part of me wanted to help those seniors. They had nothing to do with Patricia's vindictive policies. But another part of me, the part that had been dealing with HOA harassment for weeks, saw an opportunity. "I will come take a look," I said finally, "but I am not making any promises, and I need to talk to Patricia directly about this. She is here right now actually. Hold on." I heard muffled voices in the background, and then Patricia's sharp tone came through the phone. "Mr. Ortega, I understand you are considering helping us with our heating issue. That depends. Are you going to drop the fines and rescind the propane ban?" "Absolutely not. The ban is a safety measure for residential properties. The community center is not subject to the same restrictions." "Right, because propane is only dangerous when it is at my house, not when it is at a building where dozens of people gather. That makes perfect sense." "Mr. Ortega, I do not appreciate your sarcasm. We have an emergency situation here, and as a member of this community, I would think you would want to help. As a member of this community, I would think the HOA would not fine me $6,000 for heating my home." "Tell me, Patricia, how much propane does the community center store?" Another pause. "I do not see how that is relevant. Humor me. We have two 500-gallon tanks." So you have 1,000 gallons of propane on site compared to my 200 gallons at home. And somehow mine is the safety hazard. Does that really make sense to you, Mr. Ortega? Are you going to help us or not? I looked out the window of my van at the darkening sky. The temperature was already dropping fast, and it was only going to get worse overnight. Those seniors did not deserve to freeze because of HOA politics. But I also was not going to let Patricia manipulate me into fixing her problem while she continued to harass me. Here is what I am going to do, I said slowly. I will come over and diagnose the problem. I will tell you exactly what is wrong and what it will take to fix it. But I am not going to do any repairs until we resolve the issue of the fines and the propane ban. You want my expertise, you are going to have to negotiate in good faith. That is extortion. No, that is business. You do not want to pay my price. You are welcome to wait for your regular contractor to show up in 2 days. I will be there in 20 minutes. I hung up before she could respond. The drive to the community center took 15 minutes through increasingly icy roads. When I arrived, Patricia was waiting outside, bundled in an expensive-looking wool coat and looking furious. Jennifer stood behind her, looking uncomfortable. I grabbed my toolbox from the van and walked past them into the building. The community center was a modest single-story structure with a large meeting room, a small kitchen, and a couple of offices. It was used for HOA meetings, community events, and various groups like the senior citizens who met on Tuesday evenings. The temperature inside was maybe 50 degrees, cold enough to see your breath, but not quite freezing yet. I found the heating unit in a mechanical room off the kitchen. It was a standard propane furnace, probably 15 years old but well maintained. I spent about 10 minutes running diagnostics, checking the ignition system, inspecting the gas lines, and testing the thermostat. The problem became clear pretty quickly. I walked back out to the meeting room where Patricia and Jennifer were waiting. A few early arriving seniors had shown up and were sitting in chairs wearing their coats, looking cold and confused. "Well," Patricia demanded, "your pilot light is out and the automatic ignition system has failed. It is a relatively simple fix. I need to replace the ignition module and relight the pilot. Parts and labor, probably around $800. I can have it done in about 2 hours. Fine. Do it. Not until we discuss the fines and the propane ban." Patricia's face turned an impressive shade of red. "You are really going to hold these people hostage over your petty grievances?" "I am not holding anyone hostage. I am a contractor declining a job because I do not have a good working relationship with the client. You are welcome to call someone else." One of the elderly women, a small lady with white hair and bright blue eyes, stood up. "Excuse me, what is going on here? Why is it so cold?" Patricia forced a smile. "Nothing to worry about, Mrs. Chen. We are just having a small issue with the heater. We will have it fixed shortly." I recognized the last name. "Are you related to Robert Chen on the HOA board?" The woman nodded. "He is my husband. I am Susan, and you are Vincent Ortega. I live over on Juniper Lane." "Oh, you are the one with the propane tanks. Robert told me about that whole mess." He said he did not really understand why Patricia was so insistent on banning them, but she would not take no for an answer. Patricia's expression could have curdled milk. "Mrs. Chen, perhaps we should discuss this later." But Susan was not finished. Robert also mentioned that Patricia never said anything about the community center using propane. "We have those big tanks out back, do we not?" "That is different," Patricia said through gritted teeth. "How is it different?" Susan asked innocently. I decided to help her out. "The HOA claims that propane storage on residential properties is a safety hazard. They have been fining me $200 a day for keeping my heating tanks on my property. But apparently, Propane is perfectly safe when the HOA uses it. More seniors were arriving now, and they were hearing bits and pieces of the conversation. An older gentleman with a hearing aid asked someone to repeat what was being said, and soon the whole story was spreading through the room. The mood was shifting from confusion to anger, and it was not directed at me. "You are fining people for using propane while we are sitting in a building that runs on propane," one man asked loudly. "This is a safety measure," Patricia insisted, but her voice had lost its confidence. "Safety measure my foot," Susan said. "This is just Patricia being Patricia. She did the same thing last year with the Christmas decorations, made everyone take down anything she did not personally approve of, but her house looked like Santa's workshop exploded. Rules for thee, but not for me." The crowd was fully engaged now, and Patricia was losing control of the situation. Jennifer had quietly retreated to a corner, clearly wanting no part of this confrontation. I almost felt bad for Patricia. Almost. "Look," I said, raising my voice to be heard over the chatter. "I did not come here to cause problems. I came here to diagnose a heating issue, which I have done. The fix is simple, but I cannot in good conscience do work for an organization that is actively trying to put me out of business and freeze me in my own home. If the HOA wants to negotiate, I am willing to listen. Otherwise, I suggest you all bundle up or reschedule your meeting." Patricia looked around at the angry faces surrounding her. For once, she seemed to realize she had overplayed her hand. "Fine. What do you want? Drop the fines. All of them. Rescind the propane ban, at least until the board can hold a proper community vote on it with adequate notice. And issue a formal apology for implementing a policy that was clearly not thought through and could have put people in danger. That is outrageous. The board will never agree to that." "Then you will freeze." I picked up my toolbox and started walking toward the door. "Wait." It was Jennifer who spoke, stepping forward from her corner. "Patricia, this has gone far enough. The propane ban was a mistake. We all knew it was a mistake when you proposed it, but we went along with it because we did not want to argue with you. Mr. Ortega is right. We cannot fine people for doing the exact same thing we are doing. It is hypocritical and it is dangerous." "Jennifer, you do not have the authority to overturn a board decision." "No, but I can call for an emergency board meeting, which I am doing right now. I will text Doug and Robert. We can meet right here, right now, and vote on this properly." Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but she was trapped. The seniors were watching her carefully, and several of them had pulled out their phones. I suspected this whole confrontation would be the talk of Ponderosa Ridge by morning. "Fine," Patricia said coldly. "Call your meeting." Jennifer pulled out her phone and sent a group text. Within minutes, Doug and Robert confirmed they could be there in 15 minutes. We all waited in the cold community center, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. The seniors had formed a protective circle around me, apparently having decided I was the hero of this story. Susan Chen offered me a thermos of hot coffee, which I gratefully accepted. When Doug and Robert arrived, they quickly assessed the situation. Doug looked embarrassed, and Robert looked completely baffled by the whole thing. Jennifer called the emergency meeting to order and explained the situation clearly and concisely. The community center heating was out. The only local HVAC specialist who could fix it quickly was refusing to do so because of the propane ban and associated fines. The ban was creating both practical problems and making the HOA look absurdly hypocritical. "I move that we immediately rescind the propane storage ban and void all fines associated with it," Jennifer said. "I second," Doug said quickly. "All in favor?" Jennifer asked. Doug, Robert, and Jennifer all raised their hands. Margaret, who had arrived with Doug, reluctantly raised hers after a moment. Patricia sat with her arms crossed, glaring at everyone. The motion passes 4-1. Mr. Ortega, the ban is rescinded and your fines are voided. Will you please fix our heater now? I nodded. I will need to run to my supplier to pick up the ignition module. I will be back in about an hour. In the meantime, everyone should probably head home where it is warm. This building is only going to get colder. The seniors started gathering their things, many of them stopping to shake my hand or thank me on their way out. Susan gave me a hug and whispered, "Give them hell, dear." Patricia stormed out without a word, and Margaret followed her like a loyal servant. Jennifer, Doug, and Robert stayed behind. "I am sorry about all of this," Doug said once we were alone. "Patricia has been getting more and more difficult over the past year. She treats the HOA like her personal kingdom. Some of us have been talking about trying to vote her out as president, but she has a lot of allies in the community." "What made her fixate on propane?" I asked. Robert spoke up, his voice quiet. "I think she was looking for a reason to go after you specifically. She mentioned several times that she did not like having commercial vehicles parked in driveways. Your work van bothers her." That made a twisted kind of sense. Patricia had sent me passive-aggressive notes about my van before, complaining that it was unsightly. The van was perfectly clean and professional-looking, but it did have my business name and logo on the side. Apparently, that was offensive to Patricia's aesthetic sensibilities. So she banned propane, knowing it would affect me directly, hoping I would just move out of the neighborhood rather than deal with the fines. "Probably," Jennifer admitted. "Like Doug said, she has been getting worse. I think she likes the power. This is the first time anyone has really stood up to her, and I think it caught her off guard." I drove to my supplier, picked up the ignition module, and returned to the community center. The repair took about 90 minutes, and by the time I was finished, the building was warming up nicely. Jennifer had stayed to keep me company, and we talked while I worked. She explained that she had only joined the HOA board because she thought it would be a good way to be involved in the community, but Patricia had made the experience miserable. Every meeting turned into Patricia lecturing everyone about her vision for the neighborhood, and anyone who disagreed with her was treated like an enemy. "Why do people keep electing her as president?" I asked as I tested the thermostat one final time. "She runs unopposed. No one wants the job because it is a lot of work for no pay. And Patricia has been doing it for 5 years, so people just assume she should keep doing it. But maybe this will change things. People are going to hear about what happened tonight, and they are not going to be happy." Jennifer was right. By the next morning, the story had spread through the entire neighborhood. My phone started ringing at 7 in the morning with calls from neighbors who wanted to hear my side of things. Apparently, multiple versions of the story were circulating, including one where I had heroically stood up to Patricia in front of dozens of witnesses and forced the HOA to back down. It was not entirely inaccurate, but the retelling had added some dramatic embellishments I had not actually done. The online neighborhood forum, which was usually filled with complaints about barking dogs and misplaced trash cans, exploded with activity. Thread after thread discussed the propane ban, Patricia's leadership, and calls for reform. Several people pointed out other instances where Patricia had abused her authority or implemented ridiculous rules. One person shared a story about being fined for having the wrong shade of gray paint on their shutters. Another talked about being threatened with legal action for planting flowers that were not on the approved plant list. Patricia tried to do damage control by posting a long statement defending the propane ban as a legitimate safety concern, but it was immediately torn apart in the comments. Someone pointed out that there had never been a single propane-related incident in the neighborhood's 15-year history. Another person found statistics showing that propane was actually safer than natural gas in many applications. A retired firefighter who lived in the community wrote a detailed post explaining proper propane storage safety and concluded that the ban had been completely unnecessary. The situation escalated further when a local news station picked up the story. Apparently, someone had contacted them about the HOA banning a necessary heating source during a dangerous cold snap. A reporter called me and asked if I would be willing to do an interview. I agreed, figuring that public pressure might be the only way to create lasting change. The interview aired on the evening news 2 days after the community center incident. They framed it as a story about HOA overreach, with me as the small business owner fighting back against unreasonable regulations. They also interviewed several other homeowners who had been affected by Patricia's policies over the years. The segment ended with a shot of Patricia refusing to comment and closing her door on the reporter, which did not make her look good. After the news segment aired, things got even more interesting. A lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes reached out to me and offered to review my case for free. He explained that HOAs did have broad authority to create and enforce rules, but they also had legal obligations to act reasonably and in the best interests of the community. Banning a necessary utility with minimal notice during winter could potentially be considered a breach of that obligation, especially since the ban did not apply to the HOA's own facilities. You could probably sue them for the fines, plus any costs you incurred trying to fight the ban, the lawyer explained during a phone consultation. You might even have a case for harassment, given that it seems you were specifically targeted, but litigation is expensive and time-consuming. My advice would be to use the threat of legal action as leverage to force meaningful reforms in how the HOA operates. I thought about it carefully. I did not really want to sue anyone. I just wanted to live in my house, run my business, and be left alone. But I also did not want Patricia to keep terrorizing other homeowners with impunity. If threatening legal action could create systemic change, it might be worth pursuing. I sent a formal letter to the HOA board, copied to all members, outlining the legal issues with the propane ban and demanding that Patricia step down as president. I made it clear that I was willing to escalate to legal action if necessary, but that I would prefer to resolve things amicably. The letter was carefully worded to avoid actual threats, but make the consequences of inaction clear. The response came faster than I expected. Jennifer called me the next day to tell me that Patricia had resigned from the HOA board entirely, not just as president. Apparently, the combination of public embarrassment, the news coverage, and the threat of legal action had been too much for her. Margaret had also resigned in solidarity, which left the board down 2 members. We are going to hold emergency elections to fill the vacant positions, Jennifer explained. And we are going to implement some new rules about how the board operates. Transparency requirements, minimum notice periods for new policies, and a formal appeals process for fines. Basically, everything that should have been in place all along but was not. That is great news. Who is going to be the new president? Well, that is actually why I am calling. Several people have suggested you should run. I almost dropped the phone. I do not want to be on the HOA board. I barely wanted to be involved in any of this. I know, but people trust you. You stood up to Patricia when no one else would, and you understand the practical side of homeownership better than most people. At least think about it. I told her I would consider it, but I already knew my answer. I had no interest in spending my evenings at board meetings arguing about landscaping standards and parking regulations. However, I did agree to help vet candidates and provide input on the new operational rules. If my experience could help prevent future abuses, that was worth my time. The emergency elections were held 3 weeks later, in early January. The temperature had finally risen above freezing for the first time in weeks, and the community center was packed with homeowners who wanted to have a say in the HOA's future. 2 new board members were elected. A retired teacher named Helen Briggs who promised to bring common sense back to the board, and a younger guy named Marcus Shaw who worked in project management and understood organizational systems. During the meeting, the board also voted to adopt a new set of operational guidelines that required 30 days' notice before any new policy could take effect, mandatory cost-benefit analyses for policies that would affect homeowner expenses, and quarterly community meetings where anyone could voice concerns. It was not a perfect system, but it was a massive improvement over Patricia's authoritarian approach. I thought that would be the end of it. The propane ban was gone, the HOA had new leadership, and things were slowly returning to normal. I went back to focusing on my business, which had actually picked up significantly after all the publicity. Apparently, being the guy who stood up to his HOA made for good word-of-mouth marketing. But then February arrived, and with it came an unexpected twist. I was at home one evening when I heard a knock on my door. I opened it to find 2 police officers standing on my porch, looking official and serious. "Vincent Ortega," one of them asked. "That is me. Is there a problem?" "We need to ask you some questions about Patricia Hendricks and the Ponderosa Ridge HOA. May we come in?" My stomach dropped. I let them in and offered them seats in my living room. The officers introduced themselves as Detective Sarah Morrison and Officer James Park. Detective Morrison did most of the talking. "We are investigating a financial fraud case involving the HOA. Your name came up during our investigation because of your recent conflict with Miss Hendricks. We understand she fined you several $1,000s. Yes, but those fines were voided. What is this about? We have reason to believe that Miss Hendricks was embezzling money from the HOA over a period of several years. When board records were audited after her resignation, significant discrepancies were discovered. Money that should have been in the HOA operating account was missing, and there were numerous questionable expenses that Miss Hendricks had approved without board oversight. I sat back in my chair, processing this information. How much money are we talking about? Preliminary estimates suggest somewhere between $80,000 and $120,000 over the past 4 years. We are still working through all the records, but it appears she was creating fake vendor invoices and then keeping the money that was supposed to pay those vendors. She also appears to have been collecting fines from homeowners and not properly recording them in the official books, pocketing the difference. So the fines she charged me might have just gone straight into her bank account, possibly. That is one of the things we are trying to determine. Did you ever pay any of the fines she assessed against you? No, I refused to pay on principle. The whole thing seemed insane, so I figured I would fight it through official channels if necessary. Detective Morrison nodded and made a note. That probably worked out in your favor. We have identified at least 15 homeowners who paid fines to Miss Hendricks in cash or by personal check made out directly to her, rather than to the HOA. Those payments never showed up in the official records. The detective spent another 20 minutes asking me about my interactions with Patricia, the timeline of the propane ban, and what I knew about HOA finances. I told them everything I could remember, including the details of the community center heating incident and Patricia's behavior during the whole ordeal. When they finally left, they thanked me for my cooperation and told me I might need to provide testimony if the case went to trial. Over the next few weeks, the investigation expanded. It turned out that Patricia's financial crimes went far beyond simple embezzlement. She had been running an elaborate scheme where she would intentionally create conflicts with homeowners, fine them for violations both real and imaginary, and then pressure them to pay quickly to avoid liens on their properties. Many people had paid just to make the problem go away, never realizing that their payments were not being properly recorded. Patricia had been careful to target people who were unlikely to fight back, or who had the resources to pay without questioning the charges too carefully. The propane ban in this context took on a new dimension. Detective Morrison called me with an update after they had done a deeper dive into Patricia's finances. "We found something interesting about your situation specifically, Miss. Hendricks took out a personal loan about 6 months ago for $50,000. She was apparently having cash flow problems, probably because she had been spending the embezzled money faster than she could steal it. The loan payments were due monthly, and she was starting to fall behind. We think she targeted you with the propane ban specifically because she knew you would either have to pay substantial fines or leave the neighborhood, and either outcome would benefit her financially. So this was never about safety at all. No, it was about money. She needed to generate revenue quickly, and creating a new violation category allowed her to do that. The fact that it was winter and people could not easily comply made it even more lucrative for her. She probably expected you to pay up rather than freeze." The district attorney filed formal charges against Patricia in late February. The charges included embezzlement, fraud, theft, and abuse of authority. The total amount she had stolen was eventually calculated at just over $96,000. Her preliminary hearing was set for March, and the prosecutor expected the case to go to trial unless Patricia accepted a plea deal. The HOA had to hire a forensic accountant to sort through years of records and figure out who had paid what and where the money had gone. It was a mess. The new board, led by Jennifer as the interim president until permanent elections could be held, had to send out letters to every homeowner explaining the situation and asking them to come forward if they had ever paid fines or fees directly to Patricia, rather than through official HOA channels. The community was in shock. People who had lived in Ponderosa Ridge for years had to grapple with the fact that the woman they had trusted to manage their community had been systematically robbing them. Some people were angry, some were embarrassed that they had not caught on sooner, and some were just sad that someone they had considered a neighbor could betray them so completely. As for me, I found myself in a strange position. I had become a minor celebrity in the neighborhood, the guy who had accidentally exposed a major crime by refusing to back down over a stupid policy. People stopped me at the grocery store to thank me. Someone left a gift basket on my porch with a note that said, "Thanks for saving our neighborhood." It was surreal and a little uncomfortable. I had not set out to be a hero. I had just wanted to heat my house and be left alone. The legal proceedings dragged on through the spring. Patricia initially tried to fight the charges, claiming that the money had been used for legitimate HOA expenses and that the records were simply disorganized. But the forensic evidence was overwhelming. Bank records showed deposits into her personal accounts that corresponded exactly with missing HOA funds. Homeowners testified about paying fines in cash or by personal check that never appeared in official records. The fake vendor invoices were traced back to a computer in Patricia's home office. In May, Facing the reality of a trial she could not win, Patricia accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to multiple counts of embezzlement and fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence. The judge sentenced her to 4 years in state prison, followed by 5 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, though everyone understood that she would probably never be able to repay the full amount. Most of the stolen money had been spent on personal expenses, vacations, and luxury items that she could not afford on her actual income. The sentencing hearing was packed with Ponderosa Ridge residents who wanted to see justice done. I attended, sitting in the back row and watching as Patricia stood before the judge in an orange jumpsuit, looking nothing like the imperious HOA president who had terrorized the neighborhood for years. She made a brief statement apologizing for her actions, but it felt hollow and scripted. The judge was not impressed and made it clear that abusing a position of trust made her crimes particularly serious. After Patricia was led away, I walked out of the courthouse into the bright Colorado sunshine. Several neighbors were gathered on the steps, talking in small groups about what had just happened. Jennifer spotted me and walked over. "Well, that is finally over," she said. "Is it though? The HOA is still out almost $100,000. That is going to affect everyone." "True, but we will figure it out. We are working with a lawyer to see if our insurance might cover some of the losses, and we are implementing proper financial controls to make sure this never happens again. Dual signatures on all checks, monthly financial reports to the full board, annual third-party audits. It should have been this way all along. Any word on whether the people who paid fines will get their money back? The restitution will go back into the general HOA fund, and then we will distribute it to people who can prove they were overcharged. It is going to be complicated, but we are committed to making everyone whole, or as close to whole as possible." We talked for a few more minutes, and then I headed to my van. I had a service call to get to, a furnace repair on the other side of town. Life was slowly returning to normal, or at least to a new normal where the HOA actually served the community instead of exploiting it. The summer passed quietly. The HOA held its regular elections in June, and Jennifer was officially elected president. Helen and Marcus remained on the board, and 2 other reasonable people were elected to fill out the roster. The new board was functional, transparent, and remarkably boring compared to the Patricia era. They focused on actual community maintenance, organized a successful neighborhood barbecue, and updated the community center's aging facilities. It was what an HOA was supposed to be. I continued running my HVAC business, staying busy with the usual cycle of air conditioning repairs in summer and heating maintenance in fall. My reputation had grown significantly after all the publicity, and I found myself turning down jobs because I was booked solid weeks in advance. I even hired an apprentice, a young guy named Tommy who was eager to learn the trade. The propane tanks on my property stayed right where they were, functioning perfectly and causing no safety issues whatsoever. Every time I looked at them, I thought about how close I had come to removing them just to avoid conflict, and how much worse things would have been if I had simply complied with Patricia's unreasonable demands. In September, I received a letter from the district attorney's office letting me know that Patricia was officially incarcerated and that the restitution process was beginning. The HOA received a payment plan proposal where Patricia would pay a percentage of her prison work earnings toward the debt, which would amount to maybe a couple $100 a year. It was essentially symbolic. The real recovery would have to come from insurance claims and the HOA's own reserves. The neighborhood had learned an expensive lesson about the importance of oversight and accountability. The new board published quarterly reports showing exactly where every dollar went. They created an online portal where homeowners could access all HOA documents, budgets, and meeting minutes. They established term limits for board positions to prevent any one person from accumulating too much power. These were all common sense measures that should have been in place from the beginning, but sometimes it takes a crisis to motivate real change. As fall turned to winter and the temperatures started dropping again, I found myself thinking about everything that had happened over the past year. It had started with an absurd letter about propane tanks and had ended with a criminal prosecution and major reforms. I had not planned any of it. I had just refused to accept an unreasonable situation and insisted on being treated fairly. In December, almost exactly a year after the community center heating incident, the HOA organized a holiday party. It was held at the community center, which now had a brand new heating system that I had helped design and install as part of the building upgrades. The party was well attended, with families and seniors mixing together over cookies and hot cider. Susan Chen, who I had learned was something of a neighborhood matriarch, gave a short speech thanking everyone who had helped the community get through a difficult year. She specifically mentioned my name, which made me uncomfortable in the way that public recognition always does, but I appreciated the sentiment. She talked about how the neighborhood was stronger now because people had learned to stand up for themselves and demand better from their leaders. Later in the evening, I found myself standing near the new heating unit, listening to it hum quietly and efficiently. Jennifer walked over with 2 cups of cider and handed me one. "Penny for your thoughts," she asked, just thinking about how different this year turned out from how I expected. I never wanted to be involved in HOA politics. I just wanted to fix heaters and live my life. Sometimes life has other plans, but I will say, I am glad you were stubborn enough to fight back. If you had just paid those fines or moved your tanks like Patricia wanted, we might never have discovered what she was doing. She could have kept stealing for years. I guess stubbornness has its uses. Speaking of which, have you reconsidered running for the board? We have an opening coming up in the spring. Still no. I will help out when needed, but I am not a meetings and committees kind of guy. I will leave that to people like you who are actually good at it. Jennifer laughed. Fair enough. But you know you are always welcome to weigh in on any issues that come up. The board values your input, even if you are not officially part of it. The party continued around us, filled with neighbors who were genuinely enjoying each other's company, without the underlying tension that had defined community events during Patricia's reign. Kids were running around playing tag, seniors were sharing stories, and the heater kept everyone perfectly warm despite the single-digit temperatures outside. I stayed until the end, helping Jennifer and a few others clean up and turn off the lights. As I drove home through the snow-covered streets of Ponderosa Ridge, I felt a sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge or vindication. Patricia's imprisonment did not make me happy. The money she had stolen was not coming back. But the community had changed in meaningful ways, and people now understood that they had the power to demand accountability from those in authority. My house was warm when I got home, heated reliably by the propane tanks that had started this whole mess. I poured myself a drink and sat by the window, watching the snow fall and thinking about the strange path that life sometimes takes. A year ago, I had been furious and frustrated, facing thousands of dollars in fines for the crime of heating my home. Now, the woman who had created that situation was in prison, the HOA had been reformed, and the neighborhood was actually functioning like a community should. The next morning, I woke up to a phone call from a potential client on the other side of Colorado Springs. Their heating system had failed overnight, and they were desperate for help. I grabbed my tools, started my van, and headed out into the cold. It was just another service call, another broken furnace to fix, another family to help stay warm through the brutal Colorado winter. It was ordinary work, the kind I had been doing for 15 years. But I thought about how that ordinary work had intersected with an extraordinary situation, and how refusing to accept injustice had changed everything. I thought about all the homeowners who would be treated fairly now because someone had finally said no to Patricia Hendricks. I thought about the seniors at the community center who would never have to sit in the cold because their HOA was too dysfunctional to maintain basic facilities. Sometimes standing up for yourself does more than just solve your own problems. Sometimes it exposes deeper issues and forces changes that benefit everyone. I had not set out to take down a corrupt HOA president or reform neighborhood governance. I had just wanted to keep my propane tanks and heat my house. But by refusing to back down, by insisting that rules should be reasonable and applied equally, I had accidentally become the catalyst for something bigger. The roads were icy and treacherous, but my van handled them well. I had winter tires and years of experience driving in these conditions. As I navigated through the morning traffic, I passed the community center where everything had changed a year ago. The building looked peaceful and ordinary in the daylight, just another suburban facility serving its purpose without drama or conflict. That was the real victory, I realized. Not Patricia's imprisonment or the money that might eventually be recovered, but the return to normalcy. The HOA was now boring in the best possible way, handling routine maintenance and administration without megalomania or corruption. People could focus on their lives instead of constantly worrying about arbitrary rules and excessive fines. I reached my client's house and got to work on their furnace. It was a straightforward repair, a failed circulator pump that needed replacement. Within 2 hours, their heat was restored, and the family was grateful to the point of offering me homemade cookies and trying to pay me extra. I accepted the cookies but not the extra payment. Fair prices for fair work, that had always been my philosophy. As I drove to my next appointment, my phone rang. It was Jennifer from the HOA. "Hey Vincent, sorry to bother you during work hours. I just wanted to give you a heads up that we finally finalized the insurance settlement. The HOA is getting about $60,000 to cover Patricia's theft. Combined with our reserves and some of the restitution payments, we should be able to make most people whole without raising dues." That is great news. Yeah, it is a huge relief. We are also setting up a scholarship fund with some of the recovered money for kids in the neighborhood who want to study community management or public administration. Figured we should try to create something positive out of this whole mess. That is a really good idea. What are you calling it? We are still working on the name, but one suggestion was the Stand Up for What's Right scholarship. Kind of corny, but the sentiment is there. I smiled. It is not corny, it is appropriate. Let me know if you need any help setting it up. I am not much for paperwork, but I can probably contribute something financially. After we hung up, I continued my day, moving from one service call to another, fixing heaters and helping people stay comfortable in their homes. It was honest work that made a tangible difference in people's lives. No drama, no corruption, just problems that needed solving and the skills to solve them. Evening came, and I headed home as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Ponderosa Ridge looked beautiful in the fading light, the houses warm and welcoming with lights glowing in windows. It was easy to forget, seeing it like this, that just a year ago this neighborhood had been the site of financial crimes and petty tyranny. But that was the point, was it not? Communities should be places where people live their lives without fear of arbitrary authority or abuse of power. They should be boring and functional, handling necessary business without turning into little dictatorships. What had happened here was not unique. HOAs across the country struggled with overreach, poor governance, and occasional outright corruption. But this neighborhood had confronted its problems and come out better on the other side. I pulled into my driveway and sat in my van for a moment, looking at my house. The propane tanks were visible in the side yard, right where they had always been. They were just tanks, simple metal cylinders that held fuel for my heating system. But they had become symbols of something larger, the flashpoint for a conflict that ultimately exposed serious crimes and forced meaningful change. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Mike Davidson, my neighbor who had also been affected by the propane ban. Beer on Friday. Want to celebrate making it through the year without freezing or going bankrupt from HOA fines. I texted back a confirmation. Mike and I had become good friends through all of this, bonding over our shared frustration with Patricia's policies. He had been one of the first people to sign my petition against the ban, and he had testified at Patricia's hearing about the financial stress the fines had caused his family. Friday evening arrived, and Mike came over with a 6-pack of local craft beer. We sat on my back porch despite the cold, bundled in heavy coats and watching the stars emerge in the clear winter sky. The propane heater, one of those outdoor units designed for patios, kept us comfortable. The irony of warming ourselves with propane while celebrating the end of the propane ban was not lost on either of us. "You ever think about what would have happened if you had just moved the tanks?" Mike asked after his second beer. "All the time. I came really close to doing it, honestly. Would have been easier in the short term. But then Patricia would have won, and she would have kept finding new ways to abuse her power. Someone had to push back eventually." "Yeah, but it did not have to be you. You took a real risk. Those fines were no joke, and you did not know the board was going to cave." I guess I just reached a point where I was more angry than scared, and I had the advantage of being self-employed. If I worked for someone else, I might not have been able to afford the fight. Mike nodded thoughtfully. Susan Chen told me that Patricia actually tried to contact her husband from prison, wanted Robert to somehow help her reduce her sentence or get better conditions. He refused to take her calls. Good for him. She does not deserve any favors from the people she victimized. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the wind in the pine trees and the distant sound of traffic on the highway. The neighborhood was quiet, most people inside their warm homes enjoying their Friday evenings. It was peaceful in a way that felt earned rather than assumed. "So what is next for you?" Mike asked. "Business still going strong?" "Better than ever, actually. Thinking about expanding, maybe hiring another technician in addition to Tommy. There is more work than I can handle, especially during the peak seasons." "That is great, man. You deserve it after everything." The evening wore on, and eventually Mike headed home to his family. I stayed outside a bit longer, thinking about the past year and the unexpected journey it had brought. I had learned things about myself that I had not known before. I had discovered that I was capable of standing up to intimidation, that I could navigate complex social and political situations, and that sometimes stubbornness and principles mattered more than convenience and compliance. I also learned about community in a deeper way than I had understood before. Ponderosa Ridge was not just a collection of houses and property values. It was people who shared space and resources, who had to find ways to coexist and make collective decisions. When that process was corrupted by someone like Patricia, everyone suffered. But when people worked together honestly, seeking fair solutions to genuine problems, a community could be something valuable and worth protecting. The temperature was dropping fast now, well below zero with the wind chill. I turned off the patio heater and went inside, locking the door behind me and appreciating the warmth of my properly heated home. The propane tanks outside continued doing their job, quietly and efficiently, just as they had for 8 years before Patricia decided they were a problem. Winter settled in hard over the next few weeks, bringing storms and cold that tested every heating system in Colorado. My phone rang constantly with emergency calls, and I worked long days helping people stay warm. It was exhausting but satisfying work. Each fixed furnace or repaired heater representing a family kept safe from the brutal cold. The community center stayed warm too, hosting events throughout the winter without any heating problems. The new system I had helped install was running perfectly, and the HOA was religious about maintenance and inspections. They had learned their lesson about neglecting important infrastructure. In late January, almost exactly a year after Patricia had been sentenced, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Patricia herself, sent from the women's correctional facility where she was serving her sentence. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was handwritten on prison stationery, and the tone was very different from the imperious communications I had received from her as HOA president. She wrote about how much time she had to think in prison, about how she had lost perspective over the years as HOA president, and about how the power had corrupted her judgment. She claimed she had initially stolen the money to cover a personal financial emergency, and then found herself unable to stop once she started. She apologized for targeting me with the propane ban, and admitted that it had been motivated by petty resentment rather than any legitimate safety concern. The letter ended with a request for forgiveness, though she acknowledged she had no right to expect it. She said she was trying to make amends in whatever small ways she could, including teaching financial literacy classes to other inmates and working in the prison library. I read the letter twice, trying to figure out how I felt about it. Was it genuine remorse, or was it just another manipulation, Patricia trying to rehabilitate her image or set herself up for early parole? I honestly could not tell. Maybe it was both. People were complicated, and even someone who had caused significant harm could experience genuine regret. I decided not to respond to the letter. Patricia's path to redemption, if she was truly on one, was her own journey to walk. I did not need to be part of it. The chapter of my life that involved her was closed, and I was content to leave it that way. February brought slightly warmer weather, and the first hints that spring might eventually arrive. The days grew longer, and people started talking about gardening and outdoor projects instead of just survival and heating bills. The HOA began planning its spring community events, including a neighborhood cleanup day and a garden competition. I attended a few HOA meetings, not as a board member but as an interested homeowner who wanted to stay informed. The meetings were remarkably civilized compared to the Patricia era. People disagreed sometimes, but they worked through their differences with respect and compromise. Decisions were made transparently, with proper notice and opportunities for input. It was functional democracy on a small scale, nothing exciting or dramatic, just people trying to manage shared resources fairly. Spring arrived properly in March, bringing warmer temperatures and the return of green to the landscape. I cut back my work hours slightly, enjoying the slower season and spending more time on personal projects. I had been neglecting my own house while building my business, and it felt good to do some maintenance and improvements. The propane tanks, which had been the center of so much conflict, got their annual inspection and were certified safe for another year. The inspector, a guy I had known professionally for years, joked about their notorious status. "These are the famous tanks that took down a corrupt HOA president, right?" he said with a grin. "I guess so, though mostly they just heat my house. Still, it is a good story. You are kind of a legend in the Colorado HVAC community. The guy who stood up to the HOA and accidentally uncovered embezzlement." I laughed. "Yeah, that is definitely going on my business cards. Vincent Ortega, HVAC specialist and accidental whistleblower." Summer came, bringing air conditioning season and a different kind of busy to my work. Tommy, my apprentice, was developing into a skilled technician, and I was able to delegate more complicated jobs to him. We hired a part-time office assistant to handle scheduling and paperwork, which freed me up to focus on the actual technical work I enjoyed. The neighborhood was thriving in ways both visible and invisible. Property values had actually increased despite, or perhaps because of, the HOA reforms. People felt good about living in a community that had confronted its problems directly and implemented real solutions. Several families who had been considering moving decided to stay. New families moved in, attracted by the neighborhood's reputation for strong community values and transparent governance. In August, the HOA organized an anniversary celebration, marking 1 year since the reforms had been implemented. It was held at the community center on a beautiful Saturday afternoon, with food trucks and activities for kids. Jennifer gave a short speech about how far the community had come, acknowledging the difficult journey and thanking everyone who had contributed to positive change. She specifically mentioned those who had stood up to corruption and injustice, and while she did not name me directly, everyone knew who she was talking about. I felt the familiar discomfort of unwanted attention, but accepted the recognition graciously. It was important for the community to mark this milestone, to remember both the mistakes and the corrections. As summer faded into fall and another winter approached, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed in less than 2 years. The propane ban that had seemed so important at the time was now just a footnote in a much larger story about power, corruption, accountability, and community resilience. Patricia Hendricks was serving her sentence, the HOA was functioning properly, and life in Ponderosa Ridge had returned to a comfortable normalcy. My business continued to grow and thrive. Word of mouth had brought me clients from all over Colorado Springs and the surrounding areas. I was considering opening a second location, though I wanted to make sure I could maintain the quality and personal service that had built my reputation. The propane tanks sat in my side yard, doing their job without drama or controversy. Every time I looked at them, I was reminded that sometimes the most ordinary things can become focal points for important battles. And sometimes, refusing to accept unreasonable demands can lead to consequences far beyond what anyone initially expected. Life moved forward, as it always does. The seasons cycled through their familiar patterns. People in Ponderosa Ridge lived their lives, raised their families, worked their jobs, and participated in community decisions without fear of corruption or abuse. It was mundane and beautiful in equal measure, the quiet success of a functional community where people treated each other with basic fairness and respect. And me. I continued fixing heaters and air conditioners, helping people stay comfortable in their homes. It was honest work that served a real need. No more drama, no more conflict with the HOA, no more headlines or notoriety. just a skilled tradesman running a good business in a neighborhood that had learned important lessons about governance and accountability. The propane tanks kept my house warm through another Colorado winter, and nobody tried to ban them. That, in the end, was all I had really wanted from the beginning.